Connective tissue is the second major group of tissues that are found in the human body. And connective tissues are the most abundant, they're everywhere, they look all sorts of different, and they do all sorts of things. And one thing that's kind of similar about all of the connective tissues is that there are cells, and between the cells we have wide expanses of some kind of matrix. So over here you can see cartilage, and the little pink part is the cell, and between it we've got large areas of cartilage matrix. Same thing with bone. The little black part is the cell, and then in between that is the actual bone matrix. They vary in vascularity, so the epithelial cells didn't have very much vascularity. Some connective tissues will be extremely vascular, like blood, and some will be fairly avascular, like adipose tissue or fat. And a lot of the functions that they have sound like what their name is, that they connect. So tendons are going to help bind organs together. Bones are going to be there for support, right? Physical structure, protection, like the ribs that kind of cover the internal heart and lungs. Immune protection are white blood cells. Those are connective tissues. Movement, so the skeleton here is going to connect to the muscles, and you can't move if you don't have something to pull against. So you need muscles and a connective tissue like the skeleton in order to move. Storage, so our big adipose tissues here are going to store energy for later day. Heat protection, we have a type of adipose tissue called brown fat that actually has a high metabolism and it can produce body heat. And then transport throughout our body. So our circulatory system is our massive transport system throughout our body, and your blood is a connective tissue. So connective tissues have three different parts. They have cells, fibers, and then a background substance. And we'll see some of these cells in some of them and some of these cells in other places. So in the blood, we'll see macrophages and leukocytes. In the plasma, we'll even be able to see plasma cells that create antibodies. Mast cells are also often found in the blood that are going to secrete heparin and histamine. Fat, so adipose, is made up mostly of adipocytes. And then we have a cell type called fibroblasts, and those are going to produce different types of fibers and ground substance. So we'll talk about the cells that are relevant to each type as we go through, but you don't need to specifically sit down and memorize this list. There are three types of fibers that we're going to find, and we'll see different mixes of these fibers throughout the different types of connective tissue. And you can use these to help identify what type of tissue you're looking at. So collagen are really tough and flexible, and they resist stretching. So these kind of clear fibers in the background here are collagen. And they're easy to bend, so kind of like a wet noodle, it would be easy to bend. But if you were to pull on it, it would not stretch. They resist stretching. You get stretch marks when collagen fibers rip. Reticular fibers are going to be found in a specific type of reticular cartilage, reticular fibers are going to be found in a specific type of reticular tissue, and they have this kind of spongy looking structure. And then elastic fibers, you can see these in the picture. These are these long black fibers here that are going to be very stretchy. So elastic is going to allow something to stretch out and then recoil back to its original shape. And then the ground substance is all of the background space. So all of the white space in the background here that isn't a cell and isn't a fiber is considered the background substance or the background matrix. And we can define certain types of connective tissues by how much of their space is taken up by cells versus fibers versus ground substance. The first types of connective tissue are called loose connective tissues, and there are two of these. So what is the word loose? So you might say something like spread apart or separate. So if you look in the pictures of the loose connective tissue, the fibers in the cells are very loose. They're spread apart. There's a lot of space in the background here. So areolar loose connective tissue is found underneath epithelium, and it's going to bind the epithelial to deeper tissues. It's really loose, so it allows the passage of blood and nerves to grow through this area. It's also going to provide a space for immune defense, so large white blood cells can actually move through this space to get to areas where there's damage. And you can find loose areolar connective tissue under almost every single epithelial tissue surrounding all of the blood vessels and nerves, the esophagus and trachea, and all of the fascia, so all the tissue kind of between muscles and between the organs. So this is really found everywhere in the body. Loose areolar tissue is easy to distinguish because it has a lot of elastic fibers and collagen fibers. So you can see the elastic here, these dark, thin, stretchy fibers, and then you can see kind of these more clear fibers in the background that are going to be the collagen. So one study strategy for tissues is to go on Google Image and find a ton of pictures of the same tissue until you can start to tell the similarities between the pictures enough to really easily identify, oh, well, I see elastic fibers and collagen, and there's a few cells, but they're all still kind of spread apart, so that's probably loose connective tissue, loose areolar connective tissue. Reticular connective tissue is also a loose connective tissue, and it's going to be identifiable through these reticular fibers. Notice that these fibers don't travel across in straight lines. The elastic fibers and the collagen fibers tend to be long and straight. These are kind of bumpy, like somebody took them and crumpled them all up. And this is going to create kind of a sponge-like network. And this allows for white blood cells inside of the lymphatic organs, like the lymph nodes and spleen and thymus and the bone marrow. And so it provides a battleground for these white blood cells to fight against pathogens. So dense is the opposite of loose. So dense is going to mean something like packed together. So there's two types of dense connective tissue. And the characteristics are we're going to have lots of fibers that are really packed together. So you can see that there's a lot of fibers here, and there's not a lot of background substance. These fibers are really close together. They're very dense. And then regular. You can see this kind of regular pattern. Right? They've got this kind of wavy pattern. They're going to stack very well together. There's a clear pattern of where these fibers are lined up together. So that's what regular is. So these are found in ligaments and tendons. And ligaments are going to bind bone to bone, and a tendon attaches a muscle to a bone. So these are going to be useful in transferring tension from a muscle to a bone or bone to a bone to help kind of stabilize joints. And these are made mostly of collagen. If you remember back, collagen does not stretch. So this is really good. If I'm pulling on a bone, I want to move the bone. I don't want my tendon or my ligament to stretch. So by having this kind of regular pattern, it's going to resist stretch in this diagonal, and it's going to be able to pull on the bone when the muscle contracts to be able to move our skeleton. Dense, irregular connective tissue. So dense, again, it's close together. If you look, there's a ton of collagen fiber bundles close together. But if I asked you to draw a line through it, like the last picture, you probably wouldn't know where to start. So these are irregular. They don't have any kind of pattern like the regular connective tissue did. So a dense, irregular connective tissue is made mostly of collagen, again, and it's going to resist stretching in all directions. So these collagen bundles are going to help resist stretching in multiple directions. And so this is going to make a very durable tissue that's very hard to kind of cause damage to. This is going to be found in deep parts of the dermis, so under the epidermis, and capsules around organs like the liver and the kidneys. And it forms these very tough sheaths to kind of encapsulate those organs and protect them from any stress outside of the organ. Take a moment and reflect on the loose and dense connective tissues. Try to write out what kind of physical characteristics would you be able to use to tell these apart from each other.